A regional war does not need to reach your street to reshape fuel, medicine, prices, travel, and information. The primary domestic mechanism of a 6-month Middle Eastern conflict is not kinetic bombardment. It is supply chain asphyxiation and SCADA compromise. When the Strait of Hormuz chokes, 20 to 30% of global LNG transit stops. Natural gas gets diverted to Europe and Asia. Domestic urea synthesis becomes economically unviable and halts. And without urea, you have no diesel exhaust fluid. Welcome to the bottleneck. The United States logistics grid runs on diesel, but modern, post-2010 diesel engines require diesel exhaust fluid to actually operate. Retail trucking fleets carry roughly a 14 to 21 day buffer of this fluid. Once those local tanks run dry, the engine control unit initiates a strict protocol. It is called a derate. This physically hard limits the truck to 5 miles per hour. It does not matter how much diesel fuel you have in the strategic reserves. If you cannot synthesize the urea, the trucks simply do not move downrange. When 70% of the US Class 8 trucking fleet physically bricks on the highways, everything stops. The pallets of food stay at the distribution centres. The chemical treatments stay at the water processing plants. The emergency medical supplies never make it to the regional hospitals. This is not prediction theatre or some Hollywood scenario. This is the structural vulnerability of our domestic supply chain. We rely on just-in-time delivery, and when you remove the chemical components required for transit, you remove the safety net. Hope is not a strategy. Most people guess they have enough food and water, but the math always says otherwise. You need to go to protocolsurvival.com right now, calculate your survival score, and enroll in our free Catastrophe Survival 101 course. Get the training before you actually need it, because when the local retail fuel evaporates in the first 48 hours, you will not have time to figure out your household logistics. A standard subterranean gas station tank runs dry in 2 days during a panic. Establish your SOP today. Hour zero begins with a dual-vector assault. While the supply chains choke on the DEF shortage, retaliatory state-sponsored cyber-physical operations hit the mainland. They do not target military bases, they target civilian critical infrastructure. Specifically, they hit programmable logic controllers in our water and power sectors. The United States AC power grid must maintain exactly 60.0 Hz to remain operational. It is an extremely delicate, high-wire balancing act of supply and demand across thousands of miles of transmission lines. If these operations force the sudden disconnection of regional substations, that sudden mismatch alters the physical rotation speed of the massive turbine generators powering our grid. This is the frequency collapse. If the grid frequency drops below 59.5 Hz for more than a few seconds, automated relays are forced to trip. To prevent the physical melting of massive transformers, the grid purposefully blackouts entire municipalities. You do not get a warning notification on your cell phone. The system simply shuts you out in an instant. The first 4 hours are defined by sensory overload and deep denial. Traffic lights go dark. Elevators halt between floors. People sit in their homes assuming it is just a standard rolling blackout. But this is a grid-down event, with no localized repair crews dispatching. The maintenance trucks cannot get fuel. The dispatch centers lose their primary SCADA control. As the sun sets on day 1, the realization sets in. The ambient noise of the city, the hum of refrigerators, the distant sound of highway traffic, it all fades into a suffocating silence. By hour 12, the retail fuel panic begins. A standard subterranean gas station tank holds 10 to 20,000 gallons. On a normal day, a station services roughly 1,000 cars at 15 gallons each. That is 15,000 gallons a day. When panic hits, every single driver in the zip code attempts to top off their tank and fill extra containers. Mathematical certainty takes over. Retail stations run completely dry in 24 to 48 hours. The signs go dark and the pumps are wrapped in yellow caution tape. Mobility is finished. You do not stockpile resources just to stay hydrated. Self-preservation will only get you so far before pure exhaustion makes you apathetic. You need to secure water so your child does not look at you with cracked lips asking for a drink you do not have. Guilt is a much stronger motivator than fear. When you are operating on 3 hours of sleep, standing watch over your property in the dark, that guilt is the force multiplier that keeps your eyes open. You prepare now so you never have to tell your family that you failed to do the required math. During those initial 72 hours, the grocery stores are systematically stripped of high-calorie density foods. The bottleneck is not just the supply trucks failing to arrive, it is the immediate hoarding by a completely unprepared populace. When the electronic payment terminals lose connection to the Tier 4 data centers, cash becomes the only viable currency for exactly 1 day. After that, fiat currency loses its psychological value. People realize that paper money cannot be eaten, and it cannot filter contaminated water. The barter economy begins. By day 4, we enter the lockdown phase. The most critical failure shifts from fuel to water utility pressure loss. Municipal water towers operate strictly on gravity. They require 1 psi of pressure per 2.31 feet of elevation to maintain flow. When municipal intake pumps lose grid power, or their PLCs get locked out by Iranian-affiliated cyber strikes, the towers stop refilling. They just drain. The entire network relies on constant pressure to keep the bad water out of the good water. When the pressure drops, the clock starts ticking. Once municipal line pressure drops below 20 psi, groundwater intrusion becomes mathematically guaranteed. Old, cracked pipes that were previously pushing clean water out are now sucking untreated groundwater in. The main lines become heavily contaminated with local biological hazards. Boil water advisories become mandatory across the entire region. But boiling water requires fuel, and we already established that retail fuel evaporated on day 2. People are left with contaminated taps and no viable way to achieve a rolling boil for sterilization. Living above the 4th floor in an urban environment during a grid-down scenario is a fatal trap governed by fluid dynamics. Municipal grid pressure generally delivers water up to 40 feet. Anything above 3 or 4 stories relies entirely on electric booster pumps stationed in the building basement. When the power grid fails, those upper floors instantly lose all potable water access. If you live on the 10th floor, you are entirely reliant on whatever you have stored in your bathtub. Once that is gone, your apartment becomes a dry concrete box. The lack of fresh water is only half the problem. Sewage is gravity-fed down the building, but it enters municipal lift stations, which require massive electric pumps to push that waste over geographic elevations. When those lift station generators run out of diesel, the sewage mathematically must seek the lowest possible exit point. Raw sewage will back up and overflow through first-floor toilets, shower drains, and ground-level street grates. It creates a severe biological hazard zone at the base of your building. You are trapped above a toxic swamp. When you cannot boil water, chemical disinfection must be exact. Do not use scented laundry bleach, and do not rely on liquid bleach that degrades after 6 months in a cabinet. You need calcium hypochlorite, commonly known as pool shock. It has an indefinite shelf life. But you cannot just dump it into cloudy water. If the water is turbid, the particulates act as physical shields, harbouring bacteria from the halogen chemical. You must flocculate and filter the water through a tightly woven 1-micron fabric first, or let the sediment settle for a day. To sanitize the water, you create a stock solution. Dissolve exactly 1 heaping teaspoon of high-test calcium hypochlorite into 2 gallons of clear water. Do not drink this stock solution. It is highly concentrated at roughly 500 parts per million. Your titration ratio is exactly 1 part stock solution to 100 parts raw water. That is 1 pint of stock to 12.5 gallons of raw water. Allow it to sit for a strict 30-minute contact time. This mathematically guarantees the destruction of Giardia and E. coli at standard temperatures. A common urban defence tactic during civil unrest is to black out windows and seal the apartment with plastic sheeting to maintain light discipline and prevent freezing drafts. This creates a lethal microclimate. You are effectively building a gas chamber for yourself. An average resting adult consumes 0.25 litres of oxygen per minute and exhales carbon dioxide. In a perfectly sealed 10 by 10 room, one adult produces enough CO2 to hit the OSHA maximum permissible exposure limit of 5,000 parts per million in just 6.5 hours. At 10,000 parts per million of CO2, severe cognitive degradation, lethargy, and respiratory acidosis occur. You will literally suffocate in your sleep without ever realizing the air has gone toxic. Camouflage via sealing without calculated ventilation is a death sentence. You have to maintain an air exchange rate that flushes the heavy carbon dioxide out of the lower levels of the room. This is why standard prepper advice of taping up every single door frame with duct tape is completely flawed. You are trading a thermal problem for an atmospheric one. To survive extreme cold when the grid fails without suffocating, you build an indoor micro-tent based on human thermal output. One resting adult generates roughly 100 watts of thermal energy. Erect a freestanding camping tent inside your living room. Place it on top of closed-cell foam mats to halt conductive heat loss straight into the concrete floor. Then, drape the exterior of the tent with reflective mylar foil. You leave a 6-inch gap at the top and the bottom. This allows convective gas exchange while reflecting 97% of your heat. By reducing the volume of the space to just the tent, that 100-watt human output will raise the internal temperature of the tent by 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit above the ambient room temperature. The base gap allows the heavier carbon dioxide to fall and spill out of the living space, while the apex gap pulls fresh oxygen in. You maintain a survivable delta T without resorting to open flame heaters indoors, which carry a massive risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. It is a completely passive, thermodynamics-compliant survival structure. Generic survival advice always says to stockpile medicine, completely ignoring chemical half-lives and power constraints. 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients for US antibiotics and blood pressure medications are synthesized in China and India. Rerouting shipping around the Cape of Good Hope due to Middle East naval threats adds 21 days to cold chain sea transit. This breaks strict thermal logging protocols. The cargo bakes in the containers. By the time it reaches our ports, a massive percentage of the medicinal efficacy is already destroyed. Common broad-spectrum antibiotics like amoxicillin or doxycycline degrade incredibly fast when exposed to temperatures above 77 degrees Fahrenheit and high humidity. If the grid is down and HVAC systems are offline, your house becomes an oven in the summer. Epinephrine autoinjectors lose 64% of their life-saving efficacy if baked in 120-degree heat for just 12 hours. Storing your trauma kit in the trunk of a black car guarantees your medicine will fail when your family actually needs it for an anaphylactic shock. Patients relying on medical oxygen cannot survive on standard portable solar generators. A 5-litre stationary oxygen concentrator draws roughly 400 watts continuously. Over 24 hours, that equals 9,600 watt-hours, or nearly 10 kilowatt-hours a day. To sustain just one single machine requires a massive battery bank, equivalent to 3 whole house power walls. You would need at least 2,500 watts of constant, perfect solar panel output just to recharge the daily deficit. The math simply does not forgive. Between day 11 and 30, the Tier 4 data centers and regional hospitals face total dark plant scenarios. These macro facilities rely on massive diesel generators holding 72 to 96 hours of fuel. As the DEF shortage immobilizes the regional fuel resupply tankers, these generators eventually sputter and die. When they go down, regional telemetry completely collapses. Localized cell tower arrays stop broadcasting. The cold chain medical storage freezers thaw out, destroying the remaining insulin supplies. The communication blackout becomes absolute. This is the moment the psychological reality of the lockdown sets in. You are not getting push notifications from emergency services. You are not checking social media for updates from the federal government. The screens are completely black. The only information you have is what you can physically observe from your second-story window. The perimeter of your known world shrinks to a few city blocks. If you did not download and print your standard operating procedures before the cell towers died, you are forced to improvise critical engineering tasks in the dark. When the grid goes dark, the cloud goes with it. You need a command center that works strictly offline. I built Protocol Survival to be that system. Secure your inventory, track your water titration schedules, and access your free training modules now while you still have a signal. When those data centers burn through their backup diesel, everything relying on an internet connection bricks. Get the app installed on your phone today so you have a functional, offline database when everything else goes completely silent. Protect your family with actual data. By day 15, people are forced to emerge from their homes. The initial stockpiles of pantry food are entirely depleted. Thirst and hunger override the fear of the unknown outside. This is when neighbourhood scouting begins. It is also when you see the highest rate of completely avoidable casualties. Desperate people making desperate decisions without any operational security. They wander into unfamiliar blocks looking for functioning water spigots, completely unaware of the territorial boundaries that informal networks have already established over the last 2 weeks. Now, you might think the National Guard would step in by this point. The common argument is that the military will just roll into town with water buffaloes and pallets of food to save the day. But that relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of domestic deployment logistics. The National Guard runs on the exact same fractured civilian infrastructure you do. If the regional fuel terminals cannot get resupplied because the civilian trucking fleet is bricked by the DEF shortage, the Guard cannot move their heavy armoured logistics vehicles across the state. The military cannot magically conjure diesel and urea out of thin air to bypass a global supply chain collapse. Even if they prioritise military convoys, the sheer geographic scale of a nationwide grid-down event makes comprehensive relief mathematically impossible. A battalion can secure a staging area, but they cannot hand-deliver purified water to millions of suburban homes simultaneously. The cavalry is not coming to your specific street corner. You are your own first responder, your own quartermaster, and your own security element for the foreseeable future. As people emerge and start improvising, a massive new hazard triggers. Without municipal line pressure, the local fire department cannot fight structural fires. In high-density housing, people are burning trash or using open flames for warmth inside unsafe structures. A single, localised fire event rapidly becomes a macro hazard. Modern synthetic furnishings made of polyurethane foams have shifted structural flashover times from 29 minutes back in the 1970s to roughly 3.5 minutes today. You have virtually no time to evacuate a building. Without thousands of gallons of municipal water to cool exterior walls, radiant heat fluxes become lethal. Radiant heat exceeding 12.5 kilowatts per square meter will spontaneously ignite adjacent buildings up to 20 feet away. You do not even need direct flame contact. The thermal radiation simply bakes the neighboring siding until it combusts. High-density suburbs and urban mid-rises are entirely dependent on active firefighting intervention to prevent massive block-wide conflagrations. When the water stops, the fire spreads unimpeded. In a city environment, the Coanda effect turns mid-rise buildings into inescapable chimneys. Flames will physically draw up the exterior of tall structures, hugging the walls and seeking oxygen. If a fire starts on the ground floor of an apartment complex, the upper floors will be fully involved in a matter of minutes. If you followed the terrible advice to seal all your windows and hunker down on the top floor, you will be trapped by smoke long before the flames reach you. You must have a planned egress route that does not rely on dark stairwells. When you do move outside, you must map the danger areas. You are looking for choke points, areas of heavy debris, and the locations of impromptu waste dumps that are creating cholera risks. You are also assessing the posture of your immediate neighbours. Are they organised or are they panicked? The visual indicators are obvious. Look at their trash. Look at how they secure their doors. The people who are surviving quietly are the ones you want to cautiously approach for mutual aid. The people who are erratic and screaming at shadows are immediate threats. First contact with other survivors must be handled with strict de-escalation tactics. You never approach a stranger with your hands concealed. You never offer high-value items like antibiotics or dense calories during an initial meeting. That immediately marks you as a supply cache. You offer information. You trade intelligence on which roads are blocked or which neighbourhoods have experienced fires. Information is a high-value barter item that does not compromise your physical inventory. It establishes rapport without turning you into a high-value target. When you return to your perimeter, you must utilize counter-surveillance. You do not just walk straight up to your front door if you think you are being observed. You take a fragmented route. You verify that your entry point has not been tampered with. If you established a microclimate tent inside, you ensure your thermal signature is still completely masked from the street. The goal of the emergence phase is to gather intelligence and secure secondary water sources without ever letting the wider community know that your household is fully operational. Day 30 marks the end of the initial shock and the beginning of the chronic grind. The weak have already succumbed to dehydration or medical emergencies. The chaotic actors have largely exhausted their energy or met kinetic resistance. What remains is a quiet, desperate baseline of people who are slowly starving. This is where physical preps transition into psychological endurance. The adrenaline is completely gone. You are entering the most dangerous phase of a protracted conflict. You are entering the long haul, where nutritional decay becomes the primary enemy. Day 31 to 100 is defined by the cognitive fracture of scarcity. Hollywood portrays crisis behaviour as immediate, organised, tactical warfare. Sociological data from sieges like Sarajevo prove otherwise. Severe scarcity imposes a massive cognitive load on the human brain, effectively dropping active IQ by up to 14 points. People lose the capacity for long-term strategic planning. They hyperfixate on 24-hour survival loops. They cannot calculate complex titration ratios or plan crop cycles. They only think about the next meal. This cognitive decline destroys the myth of the lone wolf prepper. Single individuals or isolated nuclear families mathematically cannot maintain a 360-degree security perimeter, process contaminated water, forage for fuel, and manage sanitation simultaneously. You will enter a severe caloric deficit and sleep deprivation psychosis within 14 days. Survival in a protracted scenario strictly correlates with network density. If you try to Rambo your way through a 6-month grid-down event, you will die tired, alone, and completely out of calories. Optimal human network architecture follows Dunbar's number parameters. We call it the rule of 5, 15, and 50. The core 5 is your immediate living unit. You manage sleep shifts and constant proximity. The symbiotic 15 consists of your direct, trusted neighbours. This is the absolute minimum number of people required to maintain a 24/7 localised neighbourhood watch. 2 people per 8-hour shift requires 6 able bodies, leaving 9 people dedicated to heavy labour, water hauling, and localised medical triage without burning out. Failure to integrate into the symbiotic 15 structurally guarantees you become a target of expropriation by larger, organised, desperate groups. You cannot defend a suburban home against 12 starving people by yourself. The Tribe 50 forms the outer micro-community barter and mutual aid perimeter. These are the people you trade bulk goods with, but do not necessarily share shelter with. Building this architecture requires identifying utility players early. You need the carpenter, the nurse, and the mechanic. You do not need 5 guys who just collect tactical gear. A 6-month logistics freeze requires more than just raw calories. It requires exact micronutrient planning to prevent fatal deficiency diseases. Your basal metabolic rate requires at least 1,500 to 2,000 calories a day just to maintain vital organ function. But if you survive strictly on milled grains, like white rice and flour, you will trigger massive metabolic cascades. Historically, besieged populations die from micronutrient starvation long before they run out of carbohydrates. You have to engineer your food storage to prevent specific historical plagues. Scurvy begins in as little as 30 to 45 days on a zero vitamin C diet. Connective tissue breaks down, old wounds reopen, and you hemorrhage internally. The absolute minimum to prevent scurvy is 10 milligrams of ascorbic acid a day. The engineering workaround is stockpiling alfalfa or mung bean seeds. Sprouting a tiny seed exponentially increases its vitamin C content via enzymatic processes. 1 single cup of sprouted mung beans yields 14 milligrams of vitamin C. It is a regenerative, biological force multiplier that requires virtually zero space. Surviving strictly on white rice causes congestive heart failure via a disease called beriberi. It is a severe vitamin B1 or thiamine deficiency. The adult requirement is 1.2 milligrams a day. The workaround for this is stockpiling dried lentils and fortified nutritional yeast. Just 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast contains over 9 milligrams of thiamine. It completely eliminates the risk of beriberi and extends the viability of your bulk carbohydrate stores indefinitely. You are essentially hacking your dietary logistics to survive a 6-month siege. To even have those grains available for 6 months, you must prevent oxidation. Packing bulk rice in a standard plastic bucket will fail. Oxygen permeates standard plastics over time, allowing lipid oxidation and aerobic bacterial growth to ruin the cache. You must pack your grains inside sealed mylar bags with chemical oxygen absorbers. You must reduce the internal oxygen levels below 0.01%. A standard 5-gallon bucket requires at least 2,000 cubic centimeters of oxygen absorbers to halt all biological degradation. The chemistry must be exact. Operational security via strategic unimportance is your final layer of defense. Traditional prepper OPSEC involves camouflage clothing and visible fortifications. These act as massive, high-value target indicators to hungry populations. The physical laws of camouflage dictate that you must seamlessly blend into the baseline environment. If the neighbourhood is starving and your home smells of cooked food, you are compromised. Cook indoors, at night, using low-odour methods like boiling instead of frying, and strictly seal all your drafts to prevent scent escape. Acoustic OPSEC is just as critical. Standard gasoline generators run at 60 to 80 decibels. In a grid-down, completely silent city, a gas generator can be heard over a mile away. It acts as an acoustic beacon for fuel and supplies. You must transition to fully silent lithium iron phosphate battery banks charged via deployable, foldable solar panels that can be easily hidden. You charge during the peak hours and pull the panels inside before dusk. Never broadcast your capabilities. The quietest house on the block is the one that survives the longest. The most obvious indicator of hidden wealth in a crisis is trash telemetry. If you are discarding empty MRE wrappers, medical boxes, or fresh food scraps into your outdoor bins while your neighbours are generating zero waste, you will be identified immediately. You must bury, burn, or hermetically store all physical evidence of your consumption inside your strict perimeter. Your external footprint must match the absolute destitution of the environment around you. If you look like you are suffering just as much as everyone else, you become strategically invisible. Surviving a 6-month horizontal escalation is not about hoarding gear in a bunker. It is about understanding the strict mathematics of infrastructure collapse and engineering structural workarounds. You protect your family by anticipating the secondary cascades before the retail fuel runs dry. You build your localized networks early, and you maintain absolute operational security. We do not prepare out of paranoia. We prepare so we can remain a stabilizing force in the dark. Because the grid isn't what keeps the lights on, it's what keeps the monsters out.